The door to her solar clicked shut, and Ludmilla released a sigh. She removed her mantle, wrinkling her nose slightly as everything she desperately tried to contain within wafted out. Hopefully, no one had noticed. Well, there was no chance Lady Aura and Mary wouldn't have noticed. She went to her dressing mirror, frowning over the sweat and grime that came with the gold rank examination, +1 death. At least she didn't soil herself. That particular bit of unpleasantness was first encountered when adventurers started dying in training, much to their post-mortem mortification. Following the spread of the discovery, everyone made sure to relieve themselves before training and keep meals beforehand light. It hadn't happened to her yet. Hopefully, it would stay that way. She stripped off her arming doublet, hopped out of her pants and undid her undergarments. Padding over to the steaming bathtub, she dipped in her toe experimentally before stepping in and lowering herself into the water. There were no aches and pains to soak away, as the resurrection made her former conditions non-existent, but she enjoyed the pleasant sensation nonetheless. Amelia came in behind her with a pail and started rinsing out Ludmilla's hair. "How was your afternoon at the cathedral?" Ludmilla asked. "To be honest, my lady, I think I fell asleep halfway," Amelia answered. "That dusty old crone lecturing the acolytes is 100 times drier than Nonna." Ludmilla tried to imagine what that was like. Nope, she couldn't. "What was the lecture about?" she asked, "that you can remember?" "Today was only one part of the lecture, actually," Amelia answered. "Part 6 out of 24, a series exploring the divine mandates of the temple, the tenets of the scriptures, and how they factor into the preeminence of humanity." "I think I remember that," Ludmilla said. "Sophia and I had to take turns waking each other up. Maybe this dusty old crone is one of Bohadan's classmates." "She couldn't be older than 60, Amelia replied. "Did you learn any magic at the end of all these lectures?" "No," Ludmilla let out a short laugh. "It was actually part of the regular education in the village. For those that could stomach it, at least. I think most of my classmates ran off, preferring to help out with their family's work instead. Sophia became an acolyte, but no one else did." "Yue, do they really have to teach this? I mean, I get it, but at the same time I don't. Everything covered in those lectures seems a bit out of step with our lives here." "The foundational studies exist for a reason," Ludmilla told her. "By understanding the core principles and tenets of our faith, we can apply them to our current lives. If we rely on second-hand interpretations, time and change will gradually result in blindness and corruption in our system of beliefs. We would be following reflections and shadows cast by the light, believing that they are the light itself." "It sounds like you understand this more than I ever will, my lady," Amelia said with a pout. "Why is it that you never learn divine magic?" "My parents actually thought it would be a good idea when I was very young," Ludmilla said, "but I had no potential for magic. Now, I just poke holes in things like the rest of my family did." "You're extraordinarily good at that, my lady," Amelia said. "I never get tired of watching you practice. It's beyond anything that I could have ever imagined." "Ogres with sticks beg to differ," she replied sardonically. She gingerly felt her side where the staff had struck her. Of course, there was no sense that the injury had ever been there. "I'm sure you'll beat them soon, my lady. No stupid ogre can stop you for long." "I certainly hope so," she replied. "I am of no use if I keep losing all of the progress that I make." Ludmilla rose from her bath, toweled off and made her way over to the dressing mirror. 2 dresses were displayed on mannequins nearby. The first was a comfortable outfit that she favored for her evening studies, the second, a more formal selection for entertaining important guests. The latter was a new piece, supposedly tailored in a fashion popular down in the theocracy. Amelia had it made with the reasoning that, when trade resumed, a follower of the 6 great gods would have an advantage in dealing with merchants from the south and would thus use garments appropriate to interactions with visitors from the south. Unfortunately, the few caravans that had trickled in from the theocracy never stopped in Irantal. They went straight through the sorceress kingdom, making as few stops as possible along the way. She eyed the folds of grey satin as they shimmered dimly in the light. It was something she thought more suited to Clara than herself, displaying very little in terms of embellishment and simple in form, so it would take someone like her friend to cut a glamorous figure out of it. When Ludmilla had first tried it on, she thought her reflection reminiscent of a stone column draped in an empty banner. Let's go with the more comfortable piece, she said. Lord Mayor is here on some business that may take much longer than dinner. Half an hour later, Ludmilla came down the stairs and found Lord Mayor inspecting the small cluster of shrubs and trees in the courtyard. Apologies for my delay, Lord Mayor, Ludmilla said as she approached him. Is there something that has caught your interest? Do you have any of these plants around your home? He asked. Those are all native to the area, she answered, so there should be more than a few. Lord Mayor tilted his head upwards, scanning the roof surrounding the courtyard. There's a Hanzo up there, I think? Yes, my lord. Okay. Lord Mayor looked down at his shadow, and 5 Hanzos came out of it at his call. You 4 guard the manor, he motioned with his staff loosely, and you can check around the other side. Come back here when you're done. The Hanzos split up, and one of them stepped into one of the shrubs. Nothing happened. Lord Mayor frowned momentarily. Whoops, that's right. Teleportation doesn't work in this part of the city. Just run there, I guess? The final Hanzo leapt up to the rooftop and streaked away. Lutzi, Ludmilla looked to her side. Check on how Mrs. Rowe is doing. Go ahead and help her out if we're not ready yet. Yes, my lady. Ludmilla stepped into the courtyard with Lord Mayor, and she addressed him after Amelia disappeared into the kitchen. What was it that you wished to discuss, my lord? There's something I would like your help with, he told her. I want to set up the first training expedition for the Adventurer Guild, but there are some things I don't know about. Shiltia said you would be able to. Without knowing what the specifics are, Ludmilla replied, it would be irresponsible for me to give you a definitive answer. I'll gladly help you in any way I can if I am in a position to do so. Then. Lord Mayor reached into his inventory and pulled out a folder. He tilted his head to read the label before holding it out to her. Ludmilla received it and flipped through the contents. It was a brief summary of an expedition to the small forest north of Warden's Vale, complete with an extraordinary map that she assumed was a creation of Lady Aura. You've learned Riastai's script. Ludmilla absently noted as she read over the pages. Your handwriting is very neat. Most of it, Mayor nodded. Numbers, too. Everyone working around the Sorceress Kingdom knows now. I see. It took several minutes for her to skim over the pages and, by the time she finished, Amelia was approaching them from the dining room. They followed her in to be seated, but Ludmilla decided that, rather than sit at the head of the table as the host, she would sit on one side of the table across from Lord Mayor so they could discuss his work. Lutzi, bring in some stationery from the office, Ludmilla said. Let Mrs. Rowe know that we'll be taking our time with the meal. Yes, my lady. They settled themselves onto their seats, and Ludmilla spread out the contents of the folder to the side. The format of the expedition system remained unchanged from when Ishban had explained it to her upon joining. 5 6-member parties, similar to those used in the training area, with a 6th party in reserve for specialized functions. This formation has me listed in the 6th party, Ludmilla noted. I'm not qualified to attend an expedition, neither will I have the time to participate when this has been scheduled. I'll be overseeing the harvest in my domain. It's something that I want to update, Lord Mayor explained. This is a domestic expedition, meaning that the 6th team will be seated with local interests. In this exercise, you'd be a noble commissioning a development survey for some nearby land. So the purpose of this exercise is not only to start training the Adventurer Guild for expeditions but also to demonstrate how they can be used practically by the Sorceress Kingdom. Lord Mayor nodded empathically. How far would you like for me to carry out this role, my lord? Ludmilla asked. Everything you can think of, Lord Mayor answered. What a noble would want to use the land for, resources that they value, stuff to look out for. Should I involve the guilds as well? That would be good. We'll be using this training to come up with procedures for all of the stuff that goes on surrounding the expeditions. The sound of steps whispering over the floor announced the arrival of their meal. Rather than being served in courses as other nobles might have done, it was simple fare that arrived as a single one. Unlike some weeks before, however, her household was starting to employ magic items. Sometime after the trip to Facet County, after she had settled into familiar routines again, Ludmilla started shopping around for the same conveniences that House Wagner displayed on their journey. Amelia laid two large, rectangular containers on the end of the table, while Tara brought in a large pot. All three items were enchanted to preserve their contents, as well as maintain the temperature within. The pot contained steaming village stew, while the containers held cool, crisp greens and freshly baked bread. It was Ludmilla's preferred meal with her busy schedule, and the items kept everything as if they were just prepared no matter how long she took to get through meals as she worked, or how late she was coming back. A small part of her voiced criticism over the idea that magical items were being used to serve such an unassuming meal, but she paid it little mind. "Oh, it's like a mini buffet," Lord Mayor remarked. "Nothing so fabulous, I'm afraid," Ludmilla smiled slightly. "It's quite simple, but there's always enough to satisfy the appetite." Lord Mayor tore up a roll of bread, dropping the pieces into the stew that was served to him. He idly munched on his salad while waiting for the bread to fully soak itself. Back when he came to Warden's Vale to raise the foundations of the first farming village, Ludmilla was shocked and somewhat amused to find out that he had his stew the same way that she did. "Does this training scenario mean that you'll be opening up the Adventurer Guild to be commissioned by nobles for local surveys?" Ludmilla asked. "I'm not too sure about that, actually," Lord Mayor answered. "Most of the unmanaged lands are in the southwest of the duchy, close to yours. The rest is already claimed, maybe in the future? It might not sit well with the adventurers if their expeditions are used as groundwork for expansion into foreign lands," Ludmilla said. "I think it's one of the primary objections that were made when Guildmaster Ironsack presented his proposal. The adventurers didn't like the idea that they might be used as a vanguard for hostile expansion. Mr. Ironsack says stuff like that too. For now, I'd just like to have everything ready since we have the chance to prepare." "I'll work with that in mind, then. To begin with, we'll have to figure out the logistics of this, starting from the expeditionary camp." Is that why you asked me about the plants in the courtyard?" Lord Mayor nodded. "I sent out that Hanzo to check the location that I wanted for the camp. He should be back before we're done." Ludmilla looked over to the side, studying the details of the expedition again. The forest that was its target was slightly smaller than her own domain, minus the recent extension to accommodate the Chronos. Covering an area of roughly 1,600 square kilometers, it would take several weeks for the expedition's scouts to map in detail. Given that it was the first training expedition, and that the activities would also be unfamiliar to all involved, chances were that it would take over a month. "A full survey for an area like this seems a lengthy process," Ludmilla said. "If you include the study of local inhabitants and any ruins or strange findings, it could run for many months." "Is the forest inhabited?" "No, it shouldn't be. House Zaradnik removed anything aggressive to humans in the nearby lands generations ago and has kept an eye on them ever since. It should only be the local wildlife. If there's any threat to the surrounding human lands there, it would have to have moved in recently." "What's the worst you think they'll find in there?" Most of the wildlife is equivalent to a silver rank at best, and most will avoid any humans that they detect. The greatest threats would probably be forest worms, or maybe some nests of hanging spiders in the deeper areas. They don't leave the forest, however, and they don't usually go out of their way to harass travelers. Lone scouts should be able to easily avoid disturbing them, and a full gold rank expedition won't encounter any difficulties overall unless individual teams are overly careless. Lord Mayor nodded slowly at her words. He finished another mouthful of stew before speaking again. "That sounds good. There's a real expedition coming up, so I don't want to lose anyone on the roster doing something risky. We just need to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing, and everything supporting the expeditions is working." "I hadn't heard. Has this been made public yet?" "No," Lord Mayor replied. "It won't be, either. They'll be starting from the Great Lake in Tob Forest and heading north into the Azalizia Mountains. The main objective is to survey a route for a new highway." "The one to Fiorizo? Won't frost giants be an issue?" "It's something like a bonus objective. To make contact with them, I mean. According to a few of our sources and that rumor going around, they're more interested in fighting than talking." Ludmilla only knew bits and pieces about giants in general, but the rumors Mayor spoke of did match up. Perhaps it was a part of why the rumors circulating through the merchant networks had become so prevalent. Hill giants, which might occasionally be found in the lowlands, were possessed of poor intelligence, and gold-ranked adventurer teams could safely single them out to be removed by exploiting their dim-wittedness. Frost giants, on the other hand, were about as intelligent as humans, crafted their own equipment, and individually required teams of mithril-ranked adventurers to handle at the least. Even if the expedition had the 4 members of Rainbow amongst their number, she sincerely doubted they could fight frost giants. Between the difficult terrain and the stated nature of their kind, it was more likely that the adventurers would be smashed. I'm not exactly an expert on frost giants, but, as you've mentioned, I feel that any contact with them will end in disaster. Is there a reason why such a risk is being taken? We decided that it was worth an attempt at diplomacy, first, Lord Mayor said. If we just wipe them out, we might miss out on something useful. That was that, then. Though the adventurers would almost certainly be crushed if things took a hostile turn, it was considered an acceptable risk by the royal court. It would be a devastating loss, save for the fact that the entire expedition could be recovered, resurrected and retrained in short order. Ludmilla idly mused over whether this was how any powerful nation with readily available resurrection magic functioned, or if it was something unique to the Sorceress Kingdom. Not that she had any real say on the matter. Her own small part was to help lay out how a portion of their protocols would function, so that was exactly what she would do. I see, she said. In that case, let's start working out the specifics of this training expedition. Their work stretched late into the evening, and Lord Mayor was yawning widely by the time he and Ludmilla made their way out of the manor. Both of her Death Knight footmen manned the gate during the night hours, allowing her human footmen time to rest. One of them stirred from its post, wordlessly joining Amelia in escorting them through the central district. There was a lot more than I thought there would be, Lord Mayor remarked as they walked towards the villa gardens. It was what came to mind for the time being, my lord, Ludmilla said. If I think of anything to add, I'll be sure to let you know. I told the others that it'd only take 2 weeks for this training expedition, he said, so it probably can't cover everything that we went over. Do you think adventurers should be doing all of this? Well, it certainly does sap the adventure out of adventuring, she admitted. A survey of this quality would usually only be commissioned by a lord that has the wealth to spare and is looking to develop their holdings. A frontier noble would probably do this sort of thing themselves. If we're talking about just this duchy, however, there won't be much opportunity for it. The regular nobles don't have the right to independently expand beyond their de jure holdings. But you can, right? Lord Mayor asked. Shaltir said you just did something like that. I can, yes, Ludmilla nodded in reply, and I did, my lord. That part of my duties has carried over from Riestai's law just like the rest. They entered the softly lit gardens, approaching the gazebo. Lord Mayor slowed his steps and looked up at her. Then, why didn't you just extend your control over the area around your territory? Ludmilla furrowed her brow at his words. Technically, she could. I suppose I've never seriously considered it, my lord. If it was my job, Lord Mayor told her, I'd be getting as much as I could for Lord Dines. As far as she knew, there was no mandate for expansion set forth by the royal court. Everyone was still slowly adopting all of the new systems to their respective fiefs, so most of the administration's attention was focused inward. The recent expansion of her territory into unmanaged lands was for the sole purpose of accommodating the Kronos' need for an alpine habitat. Unless it's an immediate security concern, she said, I just feel that I shouldn't take any more than I need. That's another reason why I think you should. The sound of her boots over the cobblestones ceased, and she looked at Lord Mayor curiously. He stepped up onto the floor of the gazebo and turned in place, the panels of his skirt fluttering in the night breeze. It's because you understand what you don't need, he explained. If other humans were given the land, they would turn it into land for more humans. The forests and meadows would be destroyed, replaced with farms and lumber mills and towns and things. Lord Ines wants the Sorceress Kingdom to be a place where everyone can live in happiness, but how can we do that if most of the land is turned into space for humans? Even Erantle is like that, the majority of the city is built for humans. I'm trying to do the best that I can with the new demi-human quarter, but the difference in living space is plain for all to see. She looked back at Lord Mayor, pondering the recent trend in other people's perception that she was somehow a good candidate for managing other races. Forgive me for my confusion, my lord, she said, but why is it that members of the royal court seem to believe I'm suited for managing demi-humans? Recently, Lord Gokitus, I've been raised for all my life to defend against frontier threats, many of whom are demi-human tribes. That is the reason why? He tilted his head slightly. It's just in how you look at it, I guess. Druids and rangers have a strong understanding of natural balance, as well as empathy for natural things, but rangers extend that even further into what they specialize in interacting with. Big Sis is a ranger who specializes in magical beasts. It's not just her being able to track, intimidate and fight them, but also to communicate with, understand and raise them as well. It should be the same for you, that's just how rangers are. Ludmilla furrowed her brow. Was that really the case? The Sorceress Kingdom's upper echelons were possessed of a wealth of knowledge that she wasn't even remotely aware of before they came, and she didn't believe that Lord Mayor had any reason to mislead her. He was generally friendly and helpful in his interactions. MMH. Okay, how about this, Lord Mayor said. Has your family ever failed at defending your area? No, my lord, her response was immediate. What about the other nobles that used to defend the southwest border? They didn't fall because of intruders, my lord. It was because they couldn't remain economically viable, and the provost sent to Erantle apparently had no real interest in supporting us. Ah, really? A puzzled expression appeared over Lord Mayor's features. That doesn't make sense. Aren't you supposed to pay maintenance for your defenses? That's how I understand it, my lord. Apparently, they didn't see things the same way. Lord Mayor blinked slowly several times at her reply. Anyways, where was I? If your family could have built a giant wall across the frontier, would you have done it? That would be unwise if I were to put it nicely. Why? It would be a massive drain on resources, Ludmilla explained, and holding it would be a permanent burden. Building such a monumental structure is tantamount to challenging the wilderness tribes. Rather than keeping them out, you'd just be attracting swarms of them. The way we do it, all that would be required are a few outposts so we can maintain territorial boundaries in a more sane manner. Did you know that the Holy Kingdom on the western end of the wilderness built a giant wall across their whole border? If what you say about rangers is true, my lord, surely an entire kingdom has many to advise them against this. I'm not sure about what rangers they have, but their country is run by the nobility and the temples. They get attacked all the time like you say, too. It doesn't even really help them. The demi-humans could overrun their whole kingdom if they really wanted to. Ludmilla pondered the monumentally wasteful move. Could a nation really be so ignorant of its neighbors? Even if someone did step up and inform them at this point, the damage had already been done and no one would believe them. Considering that the nobility and the temples govern the nation, she said after some thought, I can roughly understand what's going on. They built the wall thinking that it would ensure the well-being of their nation, under the impression that everyone thinks as they do. What happened instead is that it invited attacks by all of the wilderness tribes in the region, and now they've been driven to believe that the wall is their best defense. If they had never built that wall, they could have essentially become just another tribe simply considered a part of the greater balance of power in the wilderness and worth no special consideration beyond occasional skirmishes as tests of strength. As long as it was understood that they were not easy prey, things would not advance beyond minor attempts to raid where weakness was perceived. This is essentially what House Saradnik did. There would still be losses, but nowhere close to what they probably experience now, with far less in the way of maintenance. Do you think that the other nobles in Erantle would come up with the same answer? Not unless they were rangers or druids, or at least heeded the ones that they had, Ludmilla smirked. They'd probably be building stupidly expensive walls instead. I will consider your words, my lord. Thank you. It's something that I think would be for the best as well, Lord Mayor said. I'll see you, Gem, I guess in about a week, actually. Yes, that's right, she replied. We have an appointment to landscape the next section of the farming strip. I'll give the training expedition further thought and, if there's anything you'd like to review, we can speak about it then. Lord Mayor was silent for a moment, tapping his chin with a finger in thought. Actually, the finger stopped. Have you changed anything in your schedule, yet? Not yet, my lord, Ludmilla replied. I'll need to see how I can reorganize around my time with this sudden change. Was there something in particular you needed me for? No, I mean, yes, Lord Mayor quickly corrected himself. Mr. Reinsack wanted to put the training on hold, but Moman said that we should continue training while he figures things out. That way, everyone will be stronger and have more endurance to learn martial arts with. In that case, should I leave things unchanged, my lord? Actually, I saw that you'll be back in your area, thief for a while, so I wanted to make sure you were caught back up before then. Lord Mayor's voice trailed off, his gaze turning inwards. 6 times, he said. 6 times, my lord? He nodded. 6 training sessions per day. 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon and 2 in the evening. Each training session took roughly 3 hours. When would she have the time to do anything else? Also, what would she smell like after all that? And no good? Lord Mayor frowned worriedly, looking up at her with big, watery eyes. I was just trying to figure out how to make your proposal work, my lord, Ludmilla said hurriedly. I still need to work, and eat, and sleep. A bath would be nice too. 3, at least. Oh. Lord Mayor reached into his inventory. He withdrew a clutched hand and opened it before her. In his palm were a variety of rings that softly gleamed in the garden's lighting. Pick any one you like, he told her. Ludmilla examined each in turn. They were bands that looked to be of the same, silvery metal, fashioned in vaguely similar designs. Is there any difference between these? She asked. They're all rings of sustenance, he answered. When you wear it, you'll only need about 2 hours of sleep a week. Food and drink won't be a problem, either. Are there any downsides? Not that I know of. Ludmilla picked out the most plain-looking band, examining it briefly before placing it on her right middle finger. Aside from the brief, cool sensation of the metal on her skin, she didn't really feel anything. How do I know if it's working? You won't get hungry or tired, I guess? I see. She looked up from her hand. With this, would it be possible to move the morning sessions to the nighttime hours? Most of the regular business I conduct is before noon. Night sessions, Lord Mayor gazed out in thought for a moment, then nodded. That sounds like a good idea, actually. We've only been training during the day, but there's time for another 2 sessions at night. I'm not sure if we can get more people on such notice, but we can still try out some stuff together if there aren't. Ludmilla suppressed a sigh of relief. Everything was still managing to barely work out somehow. Lord Mayor reached into his inventory again. This, too. She looked down at his hand. There was a large, black collar. The links of a dull, metal chain dangled off of it. Ludmilla quickly glanced around at the shadows of the garden before hesitantly reaching out to receive it. Do I need to put it on right now? She asked in a low voice. You should only wear it for certain types of training, Lord Mayor told her. It enhances your rate of growth, but it weakens you when it's equipped. Maybe try it when you're doing something safe, like paperwork? We can try it during the night sessions as well. I wanted to experiment on how they could work in combat exercises. So far, they've only been used safely in drills. I'll give it a try, my lord. Ludmilla slipped the collar into her infinite haversack. Will there be anything else? No, not really, he said. I'm happy that you agreed to do all this, though. You always come up with even more stuff that helps me improve the training area. The other adventurers aren't as willing to test out my new ideas, either. It's a pleasure to be of service. Ludmilla lowered her head. I'll see you tomorrow after lunch, then? Sounds good, he nodded. Bye. Have a good night, my lord. Halfway into Ludmilla's curtsy, Lord Mayor jumped into one of the pillars of the gazebo. Did he just jump into that pillar? Amelia breathed from behind her. Lord Mayor uses plants to get around, Ludmilla told her. There are vines creeping up the columns of the gazebo. He brought a potted tree to Warden's Vale the last time he came by for the same reason. He can just pop in whenever he likes now. I see. I wonder if there's some handy spell like that I can learn. They started making their way back to the manor, with the Death Knight following after them. Maybe you should add it to the list of spells you've marked for learning so far. I did ask about the ones Lady Sheltier used, actually, Amelia replied. Even the ones that they knew about require an extraordinarily powerful divine caster. Adherents of the god of air gain access to a few. Though unable to cast anything so far, her lady's maid had come up with a short list of spells she wanted to learn. There were some spells of healing, but most were not really what one would associate with a divine caster. The clean spell was at the top of her list, followed by ones that could conjure paper, spices, water and various other useful components of daily life. Other spells that would assist with her duties as a maid followed those, while message and some additional spells of the second tier were on her list of more distant goals. Speaking of which, Ludmilla said, "Which of the gods do you favor?" "Not any one in particular, my lady. Though I suppose that now I am in the service of a noble, it would be Sursana." "There's no actual rule about that," Ludmilla told her. "I might be an adherent of Sursana, but that doesn't mean you have to be." With judgment and justice as part of the god of death's portfolio, Sursana was the deity commonly favored by the nobility who worshipped the 6 great gods, and House Ziradnik was no exception. Being polytheistic in nature, however, every god was respected for their place in a human's journey through life. The nuances of one's faith were not something to be imposed, it was a deeply personal part of spiritual life. "The people at the cathedral say that, my lady," Amelia said, "that there's no rush, and it's something that should come naturally, but, at the same time, I'd like to be useful to you as soon as possible." "I was like that too," Ludmilla said. "Well, sort of. I'll admit that I was probably more excited at the prospect of just being able to cast spells at the time." "Okay, that too," Amelia blushed slightly. "Maybe I should be more serious about this, just the idea of learning divine magic to become a better maid feels a bit irreverent." "I don't see a problem with it," she told Amelia. "The tenets of our faith encourage everyone to pursue their vocations earnestly. You are following the teachings of the gods, so why would you be censured for it?" That was her interpretation, at least. Being an administrator who could appreciate how her tenets wove the fabric of her domain together, she saw the tenets of the faith as a practical and grounded set of teachings, a guide on how to conduct one's life. As they continued making their way back over the cobblestone streets, Ludmilla pondered another set of tenets that might be the cause of friction in the future. The faith of the 6 was a human faith, and thus promoted human agendas. Not only did it encourage the orderly advancement of their species in domestic matters, but had a decidedly active role in how the faithful generally perceived non-humans. Lord Mayor's encouragement to expand her borders in order to preserve the natural state of the southern frontier meant that she would also be holding lands ideal for non-humans and, like with the lizardmen, more and more of those races would probably come under her charge. She and Clara both agreed that creating a place in the sorceress kingdom where humanity could thrive was their divine mandate as nobles who worshipped the 6, but Clara had a significantly easier time of it. Corlin County was entirely populated by humans, consisting of long-developed territories of Riastais. There was a very real risk of friction in her own domain if her human subjects were forced to live alongside other races. At first, Ludmilla thought that, as different races had their own ideal habitats, the natural separation between them would keep the peace. The Kronos dwelled around lofty peaks and alpine meadows, the lizardmen lived in the wetlands, while humans lived in their farming villages in the harbor town. The demi-humans that came to dwell in the wildlands of the frontier could also be left to their own devices, far away from other peoples. There was a place for everyone, and everyone would be able to take their place in her domain peacefully. Yet, the more she thought about it, the more this idea presented an ever-increasing pile of troubling flaws. It was the will of the Sorcerer King that all of his subjects would live in security and harmony, and all peoples be able to pursue their own prosperity. Her original plan instead sounded like dumping different people into their respective pens and thinking they could get by in that manner. The powerful undead forces of the Sorceress Kingdom would certainly afford them security, but they did not create harmony or prosperity on their own. While the Kronos were more than happy to live their lives intertwined with nature, the same could not be said for everyone under her protection. Humans tended to develop and build until great cities and nations were raised, and she had no idea what a lizardman's idea of happiness was. Other demi-humans would probably not be content to simply subsist in undeveloped lands either. The Grand Confederation was rumored to be an advanced and powerful nation with a myriad of species living together there. The lands of Carnassus beyond the Baharuth Empire had humans as only one of the many peoples that made it their home. Then there was Smith Kovalev's account of the empire of the Tiger Beastmen, far beyond the little corner of the world that she lived in. A nation that was so advanced in its craft and artifice that it made human civilization appear primitive by comparison. Rather than resting safely behind the protection of the Sorceress Kingdom's armies, shouldn't they be instead worried about just how far behind they actually were as a society compared to the rest of the world? As Leanne Wagner often so bluntly put it, Riestais was a backwater of a backwater, the furthest from what could be called a prosperous and advanced nation, and the Duchy of Irantal was still very much in that condition. If the Sorceress Kingdom was to be a beacon of prosperity to the rest of the world, they couldn't very well do so in their shoddy state, viewed as poorly as humans themselves viewed feral demi-human tribes, or perhaps worse. Ludmilla needed to piece together a new plan for her domain, yet she knew too little. How could she nurture her people and provide them with happy lives? What was considered prosperity for the various races that she might end up being responsible for? How could she create harmony between so many different people and with nature itself? Many of the goals she had set for the future dissipated, replaced by new ones catapulted so far out of view that she had no real idea how to go about achieving them. The Death Knight footman assumed its place at the manor gate, and Ludmilla made her way directly to her solar. After dressing down, she seated herself behind her simple, wooden desk and started working through her long backlog of administrative tasks. Amelia came up from the letter room, placing a small stack of new messages scribed from Warden's Vale at the bottom of her inbox. After she was certain that her maid had retired for the night, Ludmilla gingerly put on the strange, black collar. Seated at the desk as she was, she didn't feel debilitated in any tangible way, so, after a moment's discomfort over the idea of what she was wearing, she started her work. Several hours later, she reached the bottom of her inbox and furrowed her brow at a line amongst many, underlined in bold. The first 2 members of Xenon would be arriving just before the harvest. Ludmilla placed her elbows on the desk, folding her hands together. Her thumbs pressed against her lips as she absently looked down at the notification. With the ring of sustenance, it appeared that she could free up a substantial amount of time by reducing how much of it was dedicated to sleep and meals. The world, however, seemed more than happy to take it up. The night passed, and the sounds of the morning started to filter quietly into her solar. Ludmilla found herself as alert as she had been the previous day, with no real sense of fatigue. Her eyes were getting itchy, however, as she had just spent the last 6 hours curled up in bed to catch up on her reading. Was there a magical solution for dry eyes, as well? Amelia appeared at her usual time, walking in to ask if there was anything Ludmilla needed. She then went over to the desk to pick up the night's work. Her maid stopped and stared at the documents piled high in the outbox. Is that ring really safe, my lady?" she asked. "Something like this can't be healthy." "I am feeling perfectly fine, Amelia," Ludmilla replied. "Besides, Lord Mayor said as much, no? Still, it feels awfully oh." Ludmilla looked up at her maid, who had suddenly ceased speaking. She followed the line of Amelia's shocked gaze, and the chain of the collar clinked as her fingers reached up to brush against it. The book in her other hand tilted upwards, blocking her maid's line of sight. "I don't understand why it has to be a collar, my lady." Amelia both looked and sounded entirely displeased. "It even has a chain. Whoever made that thing surely had deviant tastes. The important part is whether it works, yes?" A note of embarrassment managed to creep into Ludmilla's tone, despite efforts to keep her voice even. "Well, I guess it does feel a bit obscene, my lady." "Oh, obscene?" "Yes, walking out in the middle of the night with a powerful young nobleman, accepting a collar with a chain from him in a lonely garden. And then, well, it's just the story that certain bored women with far too much time would eat up." "This sounds awfully specific coming from you." Ludmilla peered at her maid. "You wouldn't happen to be a fan of such stories, would you?" "Of course not, my lady." Ludmilla eyed her maid suspiciously for a moment before removing the collar, placing it on the nightstand beside the bed. Then she imagined someone walking in to see it there and snatched it off, hiding the item under the covers. I mean, if everyone is wearing them, then it would not seem so odd, would it?" "It would, my lady." "I meant never mind." Ludmilla sighed, realizing that she shouldn't be so openly discussing Adventurer Guild business, and Amelia left with the night's work. Flipping back her covers, she glowered down at the collar. Amelia was right, why wasn't it a necklace or something that wasn't so conspicuous? Was it actually a slave collar, designed to keep chattel weak while they toiled and became better at whatever intricate labor they might be used for? None of her dresses could conceal it. Maybe a scarf would work, a thick one. In the end, she decided it wasn't worth the risk of being caught wearing the thing in public and stuffed it into her infinite haversack. Upon completing her preparations for the day, Ludmilla left the manor 2 hours before noon. She made her way to the main plaza, taking in the sight of the market and its people. Browsing around for an hour or so every day had become a sort of ritual to her, what amounted to a sort of indulgence as far as her activities went. There were still important things to be done while doing so, however. As her domain continued to be absent of temple staff, she needed to keep an eye out for medical supplies, tinctures, herbal remedies and such, and staying apprised of new products and ideas circulating amongst the city folk and visiting merchants from abroad. Her thoughts about the public health of her domain led her into the cathedral as she walked by. She came across a young acolyte sweeping the stairs on the way in, who looked up at her with wide eyes. Lady Zaradnik, she said. What? I hope the day finds you well, acolyte. Ludmilla nodded at her with a smile. Is Bishop Hostine available? The acolyte clutched her broom, continuing to stare up at her until she realized that she had been asked a question. Blessings of the Six be upon you. No, wait. I mean yes. To both. He's in his office, His Excellency, I mean. She turned away, cringing on herself as she led Ludmilla through the hallway to the bishop's office. Ludmilla wondered if this acolyte was an acquaintance of Amelia's. The reaction certainly seemed like it was from someone that had their head filled with all sorts of lofty ideas about her. She was let into the office, and the acolyte scurried away. The bishop's desk was empty, and Ludmilla made her way deeper inside, unsure if she should actually be doing so. Stepping forward towards the front desk, a glance down the nearest aisle of shelves found him bent at a strange angle as he appeared to be struggling with a book. Your Excellency? He jumped at her voice, and embarrassment crept up her neck over startling the Bishop of Eranthal. Lady Zaradnik? Bishop Hostine peered at her. I'm sorry, I must have missed your coming in. The acolyte from the front brought me in without saying anything, actually. My apologies for entering unannounced. It's fine, he said, it's fine, Gem, that one is quite impressionable. I can just imagine how she reacted upon seeing you. Impressionable? I hope Miss Lutzi has not been too much trouble. No, not at all, the bishop replied with a short laugh. She manages to stay awake for at least half of those lectures at least. I think I slept through most of them back in the day. She made it sound as if nothing about them has changed since Bohadan's time, Ludmilla said. Some things have changed, Bishop Hostine said, but a lot of those lessons are from Bohadan's materials, I think. The man was a visionary, far ahead of his time. If not for his missionary work, we'd probably still be relying on the stuff from the south that he was raised on. Is it really that different in the theocracy? In a word, yes, he told her. It's different, yet the same, if that makes any sense to you. I'm sure your friend, Countess Corlin, has told you about it from the pilgrimages that her family made during her childhood. The gist of what I have heard from her is that they are more aggressive in the south. Broadly speaking, that should be the most concise way to put it. This shift towards a more aggressive stance in the south has resulted in some remarkably drastic differences in our views developing in the past 2 centuries. Do your superiors ever say anything about how we practice the faith here? The cardinal I report to hasn't said much of anything beyond some questions here and there, Bishop Hostine said. Nothing resembling an attempt to influence our direction. The Pontifex and his High Council are not fools, they understand that what we do here is the best way to approach things given our circumstances. The work of the missionaries that came here when the land was settled was derived from how our faith operated back in the days when the theocracy was not in the favorable position it enjoys now, so it isn't as if we're doing anything heretical. If anything, we're closer to the original form. I see. Ludmilla glanced down at the book in his hands. Was there something you needed assistance with? You looked to be struggling with something. You mean this? He looked down at the book as well. It's not exactly something I would consider a problem. We've been adding more to the archives as we slowly document all the families that have returned to the faith, and the shelves are getting packed. There was a bit of space that I saw here and I thought maybe I could get it in somehow. We're still going to have to expand the archives soon. This is an encouraging thing to hear, Ludmilla said. Speaking of families, what are your thoughts on how I handled that matter in my domain? That matter? You mean the young girl who showed an affinity towards being a ranger? Yes, Yelena Roscoe. It was so important that I cannot help but worry about whether my response was appropriate or not. You did the right thing, the bishop told her. Not even an ordained priest could have done better with the same resources on hand. You've been taught well. When she matures a bit, you'll need to bring her to a place where she can be examined for any talents. You know, this whole event strikes me as fitting. Fitting, Your Excellency? Yes, fitting, he nodded. You, too, have the so-called tells of the blood - the latent potential of your bloodline manifesting within you. Now, you have become a mentor to another one such as yourself. I was not aware of that. I can probably see why, he said. It was identified when you were young, and it was purposely kept from your knowledge. Your parents were always wary of anything that might negatively impact the development of their children, and they also had that same humility of yours that almost feels like a pride of its own. I see. Ludmilla furrowed her brow. Do tells of the blood have anything to do with the blood of the gods passed down through humanity? Sometimes, but with you, Bishop Hostine said with a slight smile. You'd have been whisked off to the theocracy immediately if that were the case. There are many bloodlines in the world. Your strengths clearly manifested when you were young, younger than Yelena, even. Given your schooling, I'm half surprised you didn't recognize it on your own, but, then again, it's usually more easily noticed by others. Also, though I say that you've manifested bloodline traits, we're not actually sure which one of your bloodlines did. I am a scion of House Zaradnik, am I not? Confusion crept into her voice. That should mean my line is that of Andrei Zaradnik. Well, bloodlines are sometimes mysterious and difficult to trace, but, in your case, it is quite simple for at least two of them. The bloodline of Andrei Zaradnik comes from your father, and then there is your mother's bloodline. Come to think of it, she manifested hers as well. If I recall correctly, Ludmilla's confusion grew. My mother was a gold-rank adventurer. That is quite average for a professional adventurer, as far as I understand. She was registered as a gold-rank adventurer, yes, Bishop Hostine told her. She was clearly far more powerful than that, but that's all she really cared to let on. Her priorities lay in defending her home and raising her family. You are actually just like her. In that regard, the spark of adventure never had any draw for you, even as a young and impressionable child. My apologies if I come off as insensitive in saying so, but gold-rank adventurers stand absolutely no chance against powerful demi-humans from the Abelian wilderness, like the one she reportedly slew before perishing herself. Ludmilla went over and seated herself on the chair facing the bishop's desk, trying to make sense of her mother's story. Had she just come up with a misunderstanding on her own? Her parents never spoke much of the past beyond what was relevant to their instruction. There probably wasn't even a reason for the bishop to lie about it, was there? Then who was she? She asked. You say I may have manifested the traits of her bloodline, but I have no clue as to what it is. Like Andrei Zaradnik, your mother was from the south, beyond the theocracy and the Elven Kingdom. A match made by the temples for your father. He smiled slightly, knowing how he was. I'm sure you'd agree on how he would have been terrible at finding a wife. I suppose so, she replied, unable to return his humor. But why would the temples match two individuals so distant from one another? I'm amazed that word got out that far. Well, let's just say that she didn't enjoy the life she had there. Since there was a way to accommodate her desire to distance herself from it, it was an easy-to-answer request. This would also support the idea that she was downplaying her ability as an adventurer to avoid drawing attention to herself. Ludmilla frowned down at the bishop's desk. It seemed that there was always some crucial information that eluded her when it came to things she considered important in her life. Bishop Hostine took a seat on his own chair, setting down the registry in his hand. You should understand that your family is not the same general group of peoples as most of those in Riastais and Baharuth, yes? She nodded. That much she understood, but she always assumed that the people of Warden's Vale migrated from the period when the theocracy was seeding the lands devastated by the demon gods 2 centuries previous. As I understand it, he went on, both Andrei Zarodnik and your mother's line are both from the same region, the same people, even. A people renowned as soldiers, mercenaries and warriors. If you knew of Gazif Stranov, King Ramposa's warrior captain, he was actually from the same place. Your mother was from a bloodline of soldiers, and she was quite the captain herself, from what little I could gather. I did not know about any of that, Your Excellency, Ludmilla admitted. If that is the case, then what should I do? Am I a ranger of my father's line, or some sort of soldier, like my mother? If it is both, our tenets say that we should focus on our path, but what is to be done if we have the potential for more than one? The answer would be to find a way to harness both, without deviating from a single path. Is there such a thing? There is, the bishop told her. Sometimes it's practically impossible when affinities diverge too greatly, such as being caught between becoming a wizard or a paladin, at which point one is probably better off choosing a single path and relying on raw potential alone. In your case, both your father and your mother have warrior affinities and are from a warrior people, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to pursue a path along those lines. It should already be something familiar to you, considering that you are a frontier noble. To follow in the footsteps of the great captains of old, powerful warrior lords who stood with their men and led them into battle. Though somewhat embellished in their retelling, they were not too much different than your father, mother, or any of your ancestors in their role. Therein I believe lies your path, but, according to Themis, you are already doing just that. It appears that your intuition has already set you on the correct course. I did not come into this path on my own, Ludmilla told him. I have been blessed with an excellent new liege who is guiding me in many things. Not only Lady Shaltia, but others from the Sorceress Kingdom as well. It's no small wonder, Bishop Hostin said. A great captain is of benefit to any nation. Considering the power of the Sorceress Kingdom's armies, it is a very clear way to distinguish oneself. While they certainly do not need the strength of mortal arms, a commander who can magnify their existing strength is very much a desirable resource. Ludmilla did not believe it was something so shallow as being a desirable resource, but she did not refute him. She was satisfied to be of any use to a liege who had already done so much for her, and being so did not preclude the other aspects of their relationship at any rate. Thank you for letting me know about all of this, Your Excellency. She rose from her seat. I will continue in my efforts. If humanity here will benefit from my contributions, then it is my duty to the faith to do so. Speaking of our people, has there been any reply from the theocracy about our need for temple staff? The good news is that our lines of communication are flowing freely once again, he told her after standing himself. I'm still negotiating for temple staff, however. Negotiating? Ludmilla furrowed her brow. I did not know that it was something that required negotiating. The ministry is needed here, sooner or later, something will happen without them. Is there a lack of priests in the theocracy for some reason? To be honest, he replied, I don't know what the source of their hesitation is. I also do not believe the theocracy could have a shortage of priests, of all things. Countess Corlin is in an even more dire situation than you. She has over 100 villages without a priest, and 3 temples with next to no staff. From an administrative standpoint, it's quite absurd. If any disaster or great plague befalls us, we will be in a great deal of trouble. There is an imminent and guaranteed concern before that, Ludmilla told him. Both Countess Corlin and I are introducing a basic, standardized education in our fiefs. We have an entire generation about to be schooled not by a scholar from the theocracy, but an instructor trained by the Sorceress Kingdom. The longer the theocracy delays in their decision, the longer we have our children exposed to a foreign education without the benefit of a proper foundation in the faith. Bishop Hostin frowned slightly as she spoke and, in the end, let out a rueful chuckle. Did you collude with Countess Corlin over this? He asked. No. Ludmilla answered, I do not believe anything needs to be said between us on this matter. It is what it is it not? Indeed, the bishop rubbed his lower lip with a finger. I'm uncertain if the two of you have provided me with additional leverage in our ongoing petitions for temple staff or if you've placed me in a quandary. You are 2 of the most faithful nobles I've known, but, at the same time, you are nobles through and through. Your father was never so ambitious as this. It is the reality of the Sorceress Kingdom, Your Excellency, Ludmilla told him. Our nation is on the brink of prosperity witnessed nowhere else, prosperity that will create a burgeoning society that will blossom and flourish. All who recognize this are fighting to stay ahead of the great wave that will sweep the things of the past away. Faith without works will find no purchase here, the temples of the four falter and stagnate. The faith of the six must rise to the occasion, or we will find ourselves left behind. Leverage, then, he smiled slightly. It would be better to consider it an opportunity. Shrines, chapels and temples stand empty, the people are already our faithful, awaiting the touch of the ministry. You have the support of the local administration in these same lands. We are quite literally building your temples for free. I am hard-pressed to think of any scenario as welcoming as this. You two are really. The bishop looked up at her. Are you sure you didn't come up with this together? Even your words are nearly the same. We grew up together, Ludmilla said. It is not surprising that we would see at least some things the same way. It's still quite uncanny. Bishop Austin rose to his feet, but I agree that there is merit in approaching it from that angle. If they are treating my petitions as something that they have the luxury of time to address, this should be just the thing to dissuade them from that assumption, and persuade them of the sureness of our course.